Great. So my name's Marty Breen, and I am here to welcome you all to the first Faith and Advocacy Network Forum, Pandemic as Portal. We trust that you've read about our strategic plan, where we defined our mission as transforming our world by seeking justice and peace through community partnerships inspired by faith, love, and humility. So this evening, we intend to spark a wider conversation exploring how we can move the world toward justice and peace using what we've learned during the pandemic. I think we can all agree that over the past year, we have learned that what was normal can no longer be. So this evening, I hope we can begin to determine what the new normal will look like for people of faith as we go forward. So without further ado, I want to introduce our presenter, Adelaide Steedley. Adelaide is a graduate of Grady High School and Georgia Tech. She has a degree in city planning, and she credits her journey and experience to growing up during busing and her parents' activism during the civil rights movement. They believe that cities and proximity could rebuild could bridge and rebuild communities. So her training is in affordable housing, and her career has been in that and community development for about 20 years. She lived in Boston and Baltimore, working for 3 national nonprofit intermediaries to fund community development programs across the country. In 2011, she ventured offshore and worked in Johannesburg, South Africa with her 2 children, Zora and Lorne, working there to help connect for-profit developers and the government to build affordable housing in one of the world's most unequal societies. Since 2019, she has been back in Atlanta, where she is senior director for strategy and policy at the Atlanta Housing Authority, which is the 10th largest agency of its kind in the country. She was married at St. Luke's in 1997 and is very excited to be joining our congregation formally with Bishop Wright on May 13th. So Adelaide, welcome. Thank you for this, and let's go.
Thank you very much. When I wrote that, it didn't sound as long and pompous as it does when somebody reads it out loud. So next time I'll shorten it up a little bit, but I was trying to make it relevant to the topic today. So when we were organizing these, Panky asked me what day did I want to do the presentation. And I said, what's the Sunday closest to May Day, International Workers' Day? And she said, May the 2nd. So happy Workers' Day and International Workers' Day, and happy May Day to everybody. I hope that I'll present I think in general, I'll try and present the content for about 15, 20 minutes or so, and hope that the rest of the time we can use with conversation and discussion. So I hope that I'm not going to take up the whole time in the presentation. The topic may be a little bit technical in nature, and I've asked folks that if I get into the weeds to please pull me out. The point of this is to inform our faith walk and what we believe in and why, and how this hopefully will help guide us that. If anybody has any experience or expertise in the stuff that we're talking about today, please bring that up, and please shout that out in your work. St. Luke's is full of all kinds of experts and knowledge and know-how. It's one of my favorite parts about this church. I get to learn new stuff every time we get together. And then last, I just wanted to thank my ACT group from our discernments last summer. I learned a lot from talking with each of you guys, and a lot of you know who you are, but thanks again, and thanks for being here. And also just thanks to the members of the Faith and Advocacy Network that are here. Just a little special shout out to those folks. All right, so I will share my screen. I have prepared a little PowerPoint to help guide our conversation today. And I'm gonna click stuff out of the way. So this is really, I think Marty already mentioned that this is part of our strategic planning process, is in order to building community. The classes are a part of our desire to want to build community around issues we care about, things that we need to learn, raising important questions, and looking to each other in faith and action as we start to engage the broader community. And this, a little bit of a reference to the strategic plan. This mission statement was what was, we kind of worked on that, and it's very special to us, I think. So I'm going to do a very quick overview of income inequality, the agenda today. It's a very big, meaty topic. It was originally income and wealth inequality, and I realized as I started getting into it that it's really clear just to call it economic inequality. So how we propose to tackle it today and connect it back to our faith. So why is St. Luke's and why is our group looking at this topic? How is it relevant to what we're doing? This is a little bit of data and science about what it is and how it looks in Atlanta as a model, so people can feel it and resonate and connect it to your own personal experience. I ask, why is it important? And then we can take a pause here and what does it mean? Why does it matter? And then some thoughts about what can be done, what we're learning and experience, and maybe some reflection on what other people are doing directly and people that are directed, connected to those concerns. And lastly, just conversations and impressions from their group on bringing it back to St. Luke's. What do you guys think? And what are some of the questions it raises in your mind? And what are some of the things that you would like to be connected to in the future? So in looking at why St. Luke's, one of the questions we asked ourselves in the strategic planning process, there's so many things out there that our community wanted to address, that we wanted to address in the community. And so we, as a bit of a discipline, we asked ourselves, why St. Luke's and why now? Why would we include it in the work we're doing now? Several folks said this is aligned with the vision of the church. We do these things because we are followers of Christ. We're focused in economic justice. This is our community. We, this wonderful phrase that Ed uses, the intractable issues of the inner city, notes all the time that we pass other churches to come downtown. And so the issues we're going to talk about today are sitting right where our church sits. And that's why we come to St. Luke's. And this one I heard, this is from the last cast book reading at the very end. I think Ed, I'm not sure who said this, but above all, we walk in love, not in fear. We're a love-based congregation. And so pushing against caste is hard. And a lot of those conversations were hard. And that was one of the big takeaways. So we need to be intentional. And in that context, economic justice is actually a faith walk. So this is a direct quote from the forum. Dr. Beverly Tatum was the past president of Spelman and wrote a wonderful book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And she's been to a couple of our forums. And she just said, if we want to say Black Lives Matter and interrupt systems that have devalued Black life, we have to make it possible for Black people to live with dignity. And we'll talk about the connection between work and dignity. And then Dr. King, who was also a member of our community, said, we're confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. And one of the great parts of this quote is, I think we are in the midst of an unfolding conundrum of life and history. So this quote certainly fits with what we're grappling with right now. So economic justice, I think, is us. We do care, and it does matter. So what is it? So there are basically three dimensions to income inequality, economic inequality. So there's a term called income inequality, wealth inequality, and income immobility. And I've got a quick slide for each one of those. Income inequality is essentially the comparison of wages and incomes. Wealth inequality is the disparities in the net worth of families and individuals, and income mobility refers to the ability to move up the income or the wealth ladder. Ultimately, these disparities and inequalities are the present manifestation of all the past and current systems of oppression, including caste, segregation, discrimination, devaluation, and dehumanization. Dr. Tatum basically just said the devaluing of the Black labor force is sort of the essence of these inequalities. So let's go one by one. So income inequality is the difference in household income between those at the bottom and those at the top. If you all have questions in the chat, or Marty, if you see those, or if anybody see those, just let me know. So why is it important? And this is related back to Dr. Tatum's quote, and all of us who have been unemployed or laid off or celebrate promotions and celebrate job opportunities, it's the dignity and value of work. You know, one of the interesting things is the stimulus bill passed out unemployment checks that were bigger than some people's employment. What does that tell us about how important their job is when they get more money to not work than they do working? So how does it play out in Atlanta? In Atlanta, the average white income is $83,722 a year. The African-American average income is $28,105. That's a 3 times difference. You could also measure it as the ratio between the average income of the lowest 20% and the highest 5%. So this sometimes is referred to the Gini coefficient. So it's the relationship between the lowest average household incomes and the highest average household incomes. In Atlanta, the lowest 20% earn on average $16,927. The highest 5% earn $306,000. That's a ratio of 18 to 1. And that has the distinction of being the highest of any major city in the United States for urban inequality. And this is a study that came out by the Brookings Institution in 2016. And there it is. And not only did we rank the highest for income inequality, which maybe you guys have seen in the newspaper, we have topped this list or bottomed it 3 out of the last 5 times the analysis has been done since 2014. And just by comparison, the lowest cities are 4 to 7%. Contributing factors in the studies, and the poverty level, the difference in percentage of families living in poverty. The poverty level in Atlanta is $25,750 for a family of 4. And yes, that's extremely low. That's a lot of folks that work in this space hardly call that a poverty level. But 30% of Black families live in poverty, while only 8% of white families live in poverty. So quickly, contributing factors, one of the biggest contributing factors is the relocation of white collar jobs and all these corporate headquarters that are moving to Atlanta. They tend to bring their C-suite jobs and their lawyers in the professional class, but the jobs will stay in Cleveland, Ohio, or stay in China. So NCR, they cited NCR, moved to Atlanta a few years ago. But they certainly don't build the cash registers or whatever NCR is making these days. They don't make them in Atlanta. They make them wherever they've been making them. So it's essentially a lot of high incomes coming into Atlanta while the entrenched poverty hasn't moved. Georgia has the lowest minimum wage in the United States. There's been a lot of us who live in the city know that a lot of high incomes are moving into the city, and that's pushing lower income families outside. So while the city of Atlanta ranks the highest in income inequality for the city, the metro area is a little bit more in the average, above average, but it doesn't rank the highest in the country. In general, also too, this is a theme that's going to play out, the American income inequality is highest among all rich countries, and it's the fastest rate of increase in the world. So we are the highest inequality in a country that is also becoming more unequal. Any questions about that at this point? Okay, we'll keep going. So now we'll explore wealth.
Yes.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, I put it in the chat box. Do you have the income inequality for Chicago?
Yeah, I can get that to you.
Okay, because it was interesting. I saw New York. I just, given the poverty levels in Chicago, having lived there, and the wealth in particularly the North Shore, I just wondered why that wasn't listed here.
Well, in a study that we'll talk about in a minute, it does change from block to block. That was one of the other parts that came out in the studies.
Okay.
So wealth inequality is really the gap between the net worth. So instead of focusing on income, this is the net worth of families. So it's the gap between the net worth of the top and the bottom income earners. So why is it important? The net worth for most families equals your home or your investment value minus your mortgage or business debt. A lot of us might have taken out, started companies leveraging the value of our home. Net worth is your savings, essentially. It provides for a stable retirement, protection against economic shocks like a pandemic, and it provides stability for future generations when your children want to go to college or want to start their own business or buy a house. And similar to income inequality, wealth inequality is growing significantly in the United States overall. And here's a chart that I found very quickly. From 1983 to 2016, the wealth of the share of wealth, the upper income has gone from 60 to 79%. I just thought that was pretty quick chart to show the dynamic. It's the trend, the way the lines are going is as much of a concern as the fact that it's growing at all. So how does it play out in Atlanta? In Atlanta, the disparity between white wealth and Black wealth is 10 to 1. So white families have 10 times the wealth of Black families. And that's consistent. That's pretty average for the country. One other thing I thought was interesting is that I found there's a project in Atlanta that tracks the value of average white-owned businesses and Black-owned business. The average Black-owned business in Atlanta is worth about $58,000. The average white-owned business is worth about $658,000. So that's a disparity of about 11 to 1. Black home ownership in the context of wealth is hugely important. Because home ownership is the key to wealth in the United States. Black home ownership in Atlanta is currently declining. So that black line is 2000 and is the dark line on the bottom is Black home ownership starting in 2005. It was actually escalating, and I remember these days when I was tracking this for when we were investing in a lot of home ownership projects in 2007, you can see the Black home ownership rate is actually climbing against the white home ownership rate. But then the foreclosure crisis hits and the Black home ownership rate has been declining ever since. During the recession, Atlanta's foreclosure rates were among the nation's highest in the country, and more Black families lost their homes and have not caught up. The white American homeownership rate hovers around 70%, between 70 and 75%. The Black homeownership rate is 40% and dropping. So this is ends 2016. I found a study by Lending Tree that estimated that Atlanta's Black homeownership rate was the 7th lowest in the country. And the job gap, also the job gap in terms of income inequality we mentioned, also means there's less access to benefits like pensions that could protect for retirement and health insurance that would help mitigate health costs, which is the #1 source of bankruptcy in the country. So that's income inequality and wealth inequality. Any other questions? I'll go to the third aspect of this. Is income. Yep. Okay.
It's in the chat box.
What does rate measure in homeownership rate? Elaine, that's the percentage. So it's not the number of homeowners, it's the percentage of Black families that own a home compared to the overall percentage of white families that own a home.
So
So,
let
yeah,
me
no, go ahead.
let me ask that differently. It's a percentage of Black families living in Atlanta who currently own a home. Did I get that right?
Yes,
And the
exactly.
percentage of white families living. So it's not yeah, okay. So it's a family count rather than an individual count. It's not a per capita count. It's a family unit count.
Well, it's a house count, eh? So it
House
could be an
count.
individual, obviously, that
Okay.
owns a house, like a condo or
Okay.
something like that,
Now I
or
got it.
whatever. But no, you're right. It's not per capita. That's a great point.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Which is somebody put in there that, Anne put in that it's disheartening. You can imagine how disheartened it was building this up. So this is what we kind of call the Raj Chetty slide. So income immobility is the likelihood that a child from the bottom income can reach the top. So Raj Chetty is a Harvard researcher. Well, he was at Harvard, but now he runs his own thing. He just asked a great question. Do children born in poverty have the opportunity to make it to the top? He says, a quantifiable articulation of the American dream. Do children born in poverty have the opportunity to make it to the top? So he scooped up 20 years of IRS data. So this is not survey data. This is not what do you think you own. This is IRS data, which those of us that do these types of analyses, you can never get. So it was pretty amazing that he got actual IRS data on 40 million children born between 1980 and 1982 and their parents. And then he went and analyzed the family's income 30 years later in 2011 and 2012. So where were the kids' families' incomes when they were children? And what's their income now when they're 30 years later? He analyzed the data and he determined 6 factors that affect income attainment: education, social networks, 2-parent households, access to unemployment. So some pretty substantial things and pretty obvious things that I think a lot of us have probably experienced in our own lives. So while the study wasn't focused on race per se, what happened in terms of the outcomes was that more segregated cities tended to fare worse. So in Atlanta, he found on average, there is a 4% chance that a poor child in Atlanta will reach the top. That means that a poor child born in the lowest 20% income will achieve the highest 20% income. And Raj Chetty points out some of his videos, which are quite digestible. Well, I found them quite fascinating, quite digestible. He points out that in the United States, it's pretty small anyway. So it's only 7.5% to 8% nationally anyway, compared to Canada, which is right next door. It's 14% of children born in the lowest income 20 percentile will be able to, over the course of 30 years, get to the highest. San Francisco was the highest city, which really surprised me because it's such an expensive market in general.
Yes.
There was a 12% chance that a child born in poverty in San Francisco will achieve. And that really was attributed to access to education. So that legacy of California investing in public education and social networks, just the proximity to all that innovation. So I think many of us understand, not to belabor the point, that Atlanta ranked 50th out of 50. So the little red box is right there. They did this analysis. They've done this analysis twice so far. And it was quite a wake-up call to Charlotte. And several of us at FAN and others have talked about how Charlotte, when the study came out in 2016, the city of Charlotte and some of its principal players really used it as an organizing strategy to start more intentionally addressing some of the contributing factors. So he calls it social segregation is the most powerful determinant. And so, as I said earlier, highly segregated cities like Atlanta struggle. So if you can look at this list, and I can send out the whole list. I can also send out the links to these studies. So in general, it was the lack of access to good schools, good jobs, which is generally well-paying jobs that are close by, access to affordable housing and healthcare, and lack of access to these perpetuate a place-based poverty and isolation. So the analysis, he did the analysis at the zip code level as well. And that's how Atlanta fared so poorly on that list. So I don't know if anybody here was attuned to this in 2016 when this came out. I, of course, wasn't living in Atlanta, but I'd be very keen to talk about, given what what other cities have done with this study. And Raj Chetty is still very connected to Charlotte, and his organization is very connected to what they're doing in Charlotte. So,
Adelaide, this is Ann, and yes, we did through ARC, had all the same data and worked with Charlotte, and unfortunately we had an election in between. And so
right.
from the irony is the Community Foundation and ARC were working really hard to come together, and Kasim was at the end of his term. And unfortunately, some things were falling apart in his office. So from a city perspective, we were never able to pull it all together, although the remnants are still working at it through House ATL and a couple of other initiatives related to poverty, social inequity, and the wealth gap. And now that we have Raphael Bostic, of course, at the Federal Reserve, we've got an ally in the work as well.
That's great.
And three collective impact strategies that are working. Learn for Life have happened since then. Learn for Life, Equity at Work, and Archie, which is the health one, as well as the House ATL.
Okay, that's great. That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I've seen bits. I've seen those, and but it's good to know that it was that to us. You're saying to a certain extent, this finding actually moved things.
Yeah, the Community Foundation, when Alicia was there, was very focused on it.
Okay.
And bringing it to ARC, who had the data, and you would keep our data maps were horrible.
Well, actually, to that note, and I'll put the link in the PowerPoint. The Atlanta Regional Commission Neighborhood Nexus has all sorts of maps and methodologies. So I took a step back.
And
so
guess
thank you,
guess when that was created?
2016, 2017, 2018. When?
No, it was right. What are we now? 2021. It was 2016 we started it, when we started working on Learn for Life and Archie.
Okay, so right at that time, yeah. Okay. So I took a step back and tried to understand more about the persistence of these and how Atlanta has these national studies. We rise to the top, not only different studies, but different studies across years. So some of the, what about the system in Georgia that makes these things feel so persistent? There's some pretty clear ones. Georgia's minimum wage, I mentioned before. I've learned that the debtors and eviction laws are among the most punitive in the country. You can be served an eviction notice 5 days after the 5th of the month if you haven't paid. Labor laws, that's supposed to be laws, offer among the fewest job protections and benefits in the country. We certainly have seen the impact of restrictive voter laws, but it slows the pace of reform. So even if we felt like we wanted to move on these issues, and then I just checked this out, Georgia ranks 34th. The state ranks 34th in spending on public education. But there's some interesting things changing. So Medicaid is expanding. Investments, there's a huge investment going on in Georgia in green and technology with the server space moving to Atlanta. We've got more inclusive political representation amongst women and people of color. The very high profile investments in HBCUs over the last year or so, which has been very exciting because Atlanta has the highest congregation of HBCUs in the country. And then I just thought, new residents bringing new attitudes. Atlanta has one of the highest, a lot of its growth. It's the 4th fastest growing city in the country. And a lot of that is being fueled by people who realize they can live anywhere. And so a lot of them are moving to Atlanta for the quality of life. It's yet to be seen, but they're coming from the coasts. So they tend to be coming from New York and California, some from Chicago, and then some climate migrants moving up from Florida. But some of those residents are be bringing new attitudes and new expectations. And then I just paused and sort of asked the question, why does this matter? Why does it matter? And in the context of our faith, it's pretty clear. There's several teachings in the Bible that lead us to care for the poor, homeless, widows, orphans, to fight for justice, to abhor greed. This is one of the quotes that we see the most often. It's unfair. The least able to pay often pay the most, and as a percentage of their incomes. There's a constant struggle. I was going to say to stay ahead, but it's just to slow the sinking, really. Tax policy prefers capital to income and homeownership to renters. Most policies we know now, we learned over the last 12, 18 months, or since 2015, 2016, were just simply based on racism. Access to job benefits, just based on racism. Economic inequality stymies growth. Study after study shows that unequal societies dampen consumer spending and reduce savings, which make your economy less resilient and more reliant on government and political machinations. So I think that's the outcome of the pandemic, certainly highlighted that inequality and the inability of the country to really pull through that particular phase. Lower and middle income spending. Studies have shown that lower and middle income spending tends to support local economies and local jobs. So we tend to buy each other's gear, we tend to support each other's jobs, we tend to keep the money, and it rolls through the community more often than with higher income households. And as the gap widens, it becomes harder and harder to close the gap.
Mm-hmm.
And then just from a humanity standpoint, and I certainly saw this in my life, economic inequality, especially when you've got poverty directly adjacent to wealth, it increases desperation, isolation, and hate. There's a lot of studies about shaming and humiliation of poverty and how it affects crime rates and violence. And particularly where rich and poor people touch. It creates an us versus them, a haves versus have-nots, which make people susceptible to scapegoating. So those are just some thoughts on trying to connect the conditions to what we're trying to do as individuals in our faith walk, and what we hope our congregation might explore. So this section, I kind of reached out and looked to see what are people doing, what are some of the ways that people are working to slow some of this down, to push against it. Beverly Tatum, yeah.
May I ask a question? Isn't
Yes.
it also, this is Ed, isn't it also a public health problem?
Absolutely. In what ways?
I think we now have the stats that if you are stuck in this economic immobility, your health outcomes are very low.
Yes.
And the incidence of diabetes, hypertension, obesity just increase, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so they call them these, you know, we all kind of know these comorbidities. We've learned that term over the last year.
Yeah.
And so you've got people that are least able to deal with this because of all these other things: high blood pressure, lack of access to good food, lack of access to
Yeah.
education about exercise. Definitely.
Yeah. A friend of mine said that every major religion promotes healing. And it seems to me to be intrinsically a Christian concern to promote healing and to eliminate poverty, to reduce income immobility is a healing issue. I would just like to add that to the, you know, the call to action. Sorry.
Thank you. No, that's awesome. And the stress of being poor, the
Yeah.
stress of being poor.
Yeah.
So I thought I would take a couple of steps and list out some of the things that we can learn from, some of the things we can pray on, and maybe feel moved to act. So one of the quickest ways to reduce poverty, they say, is the earned income tax credit. There's a federal earned income tax credit. In Georgia, there's legislation to promote a Georgia work credit, which many of you might be familiar with, which reduces the low-income family's tax bill. Not much, but it's included. It's also been included in the federal stimulus bill, sorry. So one action might be to advocate for that Georgia work credit. Again, there's a federal one, of course. This is to expand the Georgia, to create a Georgia. I think it's almost about 40 states have a state tax credit now. Obviously, expanding access to education. That's one of the things that the Charlotte focused on significantly. So we've got a school that we support, advocate for education bills, local Head Start, early education programs, and not to forget about supporting the teachers and educators in our lives and in our communities. Particularly now as essential workers and frontline workers, what they've been going through for the past year. Here's expanding access to healthcare. Ed, you just brought this up. It's preventative in nature and affordable. And this is the note where medical bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States. And I think all the GoFundMes that we see advocate. So Medicaid was in fact expanded a bit. And so there's legislation to expand it more, to continue to expand that. The Ansley School, that's right. So continue to push for Medicaid expansion. So and that's based on your income. Your access to Medicare in Georgia is the expansion. And I found a wonderful website that said all the money that the state can save, or the reimbursement that it gets, can also pay for Head Start, can pay for all these other programs, which I was not aware of. So thank you for that. Nancy's asking about Charlotte. We could chat about that in a minute. Because I actually went up and spoke to the church in Charlotte. And then I always love going back to Dr. King because he's our neighbor. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new, however, is that we have the resource to get rid of it. Of course, he said that, 50 years ago. Expand affordable housing. Housing provides stability. So there's a lot of studies, and we're going to have a course on what we're doing for eviction prevention. Because evictions have a significant impact on education for students, for children. It also builds those social networks that studies have shown are so important, and access to build your credit score, access to credit. Affordable housing is a huge job driver. As we can see in Atlanta, we're going gangbusters with expanding housing. And then those mixed income housing provides the opportunity to expand those networks and employment opportunities. So advocate for zoning reforms, which is also coming up in one of our courses, one of these sessions, and then fighting NIMBYism in your community. Invest in workforce development. So these recommendations, I was like, in our own companies, can we review our wage structures, hire more intentionally, think creatively about experience? What do we call experience versus what does the person in front of us have for experience? And mentor people, mentor somebody and reach out and be extremely intentional about this. Seek living wages, not minimum wages. Georgia is, I learned recently, has the is the #1 producer of solar panel manufacturing in the Western Hemisphere in Dalton. So these jobs and the battery factories that are coming, these high-tech jobs are coming here. And those are growth sectors. And then exploring a universal basic income. So they've put some of those models in the stimulus bill. One of the things that several of us have been chatting about, there's a national pilot amongst about 40 mayors in the United States collaborating on a universal basic income pilot to raise money privately to implement a universal basic income for eligible families. And our city councilor, Amir Faroki, is piloting one in District 2 in the 04th Ward with Ebenezer. They produced that study. They launched it in January of 2021. That's the cover of it, and I can send the link. It's very, very powerful. So we might be able to find ways to participate with Ebenezer in that pilot, and our city councilor. So some of these things are things that we are doing. Some of it's directly related to what's going on in Georgia and in Atlanta. And some of these things are things that are happening in our own neighborhood. So that is sort of the content of the nature of economic inequality and what some of the things are folks are doing to work on that. And so Marty and Panky and Ed and Ann and some of the folks that have been in these conversations with me, and Elizabeth and folks have been helping our group think about these issues. One of the great questions that Elizabeth asked is, how is this moving you? You know, has the impact, how is the study of caste helped us understand, and to a certain extent, not necessarily be surprised at how long a tail this has, but the legacy of these economic structures through to today. And then I think, how does this connect with your own faith journey? Thanks, Cappy. Magnolia Mothers Trust in Jackson, Mississippi. I would love to. So I don't know if anybody had any other questions about the content. I would be happy to, you know, provide people with slides and studies. Maybe some of you guys, you know, there was a great story of a guy that jumps onto the trolley, you know, the Atlanta trolley downtown. He says he goes 6 blocks listening to everybody talk about to compare the food served at the homeless shelters, the soup kitchens, and then it transitions, and then he's got all the lawyers and the bankers and the CEOs hop on the transit. And that was his way of how he experiences this incredible inequality in Atlanta.
Adelaide, I just thank you for this stellar presentation. It is so enlightening, at the same time so disheartening, as Ann said. I'm just sitting here feeling very sad. I came here in 1979 as a student, started at Morehouse College, and was so impressed with African Americans and what I saw, and I think what many people still think, that the Black people in this city are more affluent than they find in most cities. And the homes, the mayor was a member of my church, Maynard Jackson, the mayor. And I'm just struck by what's changed. And I don't know how much you all have looked at historical parts of what's happened, whether you talked to some about the decline, what's caused that. I'm wondering too, and maybe this is your piece about what you found in Charlotte. How do we find our way out? One thing that struck me is there's been, I think, a blessing and a curse, people moving in from the suburbs into the city, as well as from other states like New York, with bringing a lot of capital into Atlanta, which has squeezed some of the traditional Black neighborhoods like the old Fourth Ward, where now they have skyrocketed in what you have to pay to live there and moved some of the Black people out. So I think, and I've heard that's one of the factors, but I would be interested in hearing more from you about the decline and what are your
Yeah.
thoughts about moving forward?
Well, I think a lot of the articles that I read, Horace, and a lot of the research, they all started with the irony of the Black Mecca. And they said, well, they call themselves the Black Mecca. What happened, And I'm reading a book that is called Black Mecca, and it's the story of how this happened in Atlanta. And a lot of it starts with sort of Maynard Jackson and Andy Young's really drive, and the idea of the talented 10th. It sort of goes back to W.E.B. Du Bois and this real drive to create a world-class Mecca. But in the course of and then on a level par with white corporate Atlanta, and important partnerships with Delta and Coca-Cola and that sort of thing. And then the drive to attract the Olympics, to the point where they really never did address the entrenched poverty, nor and because of the nature of politics in Atlanta, they didn't pay a political price like they might have in other cities. And so that's why this thing has lasted so long. And so the way that it sounds like is that you've got these legacy homeowners, and that's what Mayor Bottoms calls them, these legacy residents that have just sat while the rest of the city of Atlanta just blows up around it. And so it's not so much that, well, I guess if you're not earning more, yes, your income is going down, but it's also the roof is just going so high. And there's not been an effort by politicians and the political class to really start digging into that issue and holding employers accountable, or and it's not a blame thing. I don't think they want to say that it's a blame thing necessarily, as it is, that's the nature of the dynamics to what you're talking about, Horace, is that maybe part of what we're seeing is in the push to build this Black Mecca, a whole swath of the city and, majority of the residents got left behind. And so that was an interesting story, which I think is part of what you're saying in terms of how we go forward, and how going forward needs to be intentional.
So Adelaide, that's kind of the point, because even the churches, and Horace, we are a part of it, because we did everything, it was political, therefore we as churches didn't do much with or for. I mean, we did the nice thing, like a soup kitchen, and yet didn't take the next step relative to what's the policy, practice, and legislation that can meet, so we don't need a soup kitchen anymore. So I think we have to claim our part in being we just never spoke out. So frankly, I mean, like, I've been living this data for years, since we started communities and schools in the Street Academy, which was at St. Luke's. And I think when this tragedy is, it all was either political, and therefore it was never either discussed from the pulpit, or much less from many other areas. We would dibble dabble, but it wasn't a focus. And the complicit nature of a lot of the faith community, which is so exciting, as you know, is the faith community is waking up to its role in how we break out of systemic and structural issues that have promulgated the situation and covered the situation. So thank you for your question. But I claim culpability. I claim culpability in that, in knowing, having the data. But it was at the church wasn't as well received. So I then did all of our work, or Bill Bowling, we did our work in the community. The
Yeah.
church wasn't a part of the solution.
And thank you. That's so helpful. I was at Friendship Baptist Church where Maynard Jackson was a member. And in my 4 years of being a member there, I never heard one sermon preached on that particular topic of income, economic inequality in the class system. So you're right.
Adelaide, my question is really pretty much right in that, in terms of, as a church, developing our capacity to respond, I think we're united in being appalled at the poverty, but we have to address the fact that we're all very invested in the way life is now. And we have, I think we get to see it play out now, where people get these checks and everybody is just really frightened by the fact that all of a sudden they can't attract workers because people don't want these worthless jobs that pay nothing. And so I think for us to move forward, we have to admit we're scared of an equal society, and we're threatened by that. And how can we bring ourselves to a place where we're rejoicing in equality instead of being frightened by that? And I think that fear comes up by calling common sense things like more, decent healthcare and affordable housing, and we call them political. And I think when we're calling them political, which is a ridiculous statement, there's nothing political about it, but we're speaking out of our fears.
Absolutely. And a lot of these trends, of course, are across the South. And I think that trying to focus on the fact that the addressing this grows the economy, and not addressing it holds us back. And so whatever people are afraid of, and maybe Ed, that's part of what CAST was about, being able to express those fears and being able to listen to personal stories, made us realize how much we have at stake in cracking this nut and solving this problem, as a growth issue, not as a, it's like this idea that I have to give you a slice of my pie. It's like, no, the pie gets bigger, and if we can have this metaphor of the pie getting bigger, as opposed to this zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Amen. Judith is right on target, I think. And it's a paradigm that's a fear-based paradigm. And what you're talking about is a love-based paradigm. And when you don't have a zero-sum game and you don't have a limited pie, and you understand that power expands and that income mobility expands life for everybody, then you've got a different paradigm. So the church has to do it. St. Luke's, I think, has its agenda ahead of it with this. And we have to remember that the answer always is partnership, partnership, partnership. And part of the CAST thing was to see what happens to fear when you get partnerships going. And John Vaughn, on behalf of Ebenezer, is so ready to work with us. It's a very exciting chapter at St. Luke's, I think. And Fan has a huge role in the education and policy making and organizing and all of that, to find 2 or 3 people from every Fan counterpart in every faith community in Atlanta to get together and do the Atlanta Revolution is very exciting.
Yeah.
I want to just say one little tiny thing, building on something that Judith said, and that Ed just reminded me of in his kind of call to personal action for us. the notion that we are all fearful of a rising population of people who suddenly will be making a living wage, that's really evident in the area of data that I live in, which is criminal justice stuff. And the fact that Georgia has one of the highest incarceration rates on planet Earth. And that's not just me being silly, that is really true. And the fact that that's followed quickly by Atlanta's rate of incarcerating people harkens back to what Judith said. You know, you take that fear and you take that power and you put those two things together and it acts out because it controls the prisons. And if I'm scared of you and I have a prison, you better believe that you and prison are going to be getting together really, really fast. So I'm going to go head scratch about that, Judith. That's very cool. Scary.
Yeah, I feel like it's very important for when our more conservative brothers and sisters say to us, this coming equality is going to lead to a loss of jobs. This loss of equality, this loss of inequality is going to lead to higher prices. We acknowledge that and say, you're absolutely right. It will. There will be changes and it will be scary, but we're all going to do it together. And in the world of love, it's going to be good.
And maybe back to Ed's point, if we're doing it in partnership and we're doing it with intention, then we get to pick where this thing is headed. You know, at a new kind of job market. I mean, the companies that are moving to Georgia present tremendous opportunity for new types of jobs in completely new sectors. And so you can't say that you know where that's going if you don't know anything about the green economy. You can't say you know anything about that if you don't know how data servers are run. I mean, you know, and I'm always intrigued by people who find that fearful. I mean, I find it, I struggle to find what's the fear, you know, because you know that when everybody's playing a game, you're a stronger team. So I can't get my mind around, sometimes I just can't get my mind around what people are afraid of. And it's helpful, Judith, and you always bring that up, and I always appreciate that and always, you know, respect that so much.
Well,
It's not just giving up, you know, the slice of the pie. The objection is giving up power and control. And that is just as critical to those. And I'm sorry, growing the pie doesn't necessarily grow access to power and control. And that's a big obsession with the people we're trying to convert.
You're right.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
It's a fear of loss of power. Yeah.
Power and place in the community, however you feel.
Ooh.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Identity.
Yeah.
And for anybody who watched the forum today, I was so moved by Chris and Melissa Buckley. And I loved when he said he gave me unconditional compassion.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, like that's possible? I mean, you would think I would know, I should know that. But so I was obviously checking myself on that, like, oh, okay.
And they just kept coming back.
And how can I do that?
Just kept coming back.
Do that. So I think that's a big piece of it too.
Arno is our guest next week.
Stop.
He just confirmed we're recording that video. We're recording that forum this coming Thursday night. It's going to be Arno and Haval Kelly, the Muslim cardiologist.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. Cool.
Wow.
Oh, shout out from Melissa. I thought she was amazing. I mean,
I'm in love
talk
with her.
about plain spoken, living the life of love. I just she blew me away.
Hazard, Kentucky.
Yeah, it's just.
I mean, how many of us expected that to come that way? You know, I mean, I had to check myself the minute she opened her mouth. The minute she opened her mouth, I had to check myself.
Whoa.
Wasn't that cool?
Whiplash.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
such a check on our progressive elitism. I loved
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And so elitism, classism, all these things,
All of that.
and that's not unique to white people.
No,
Because I'm thinking at the church where I mentioned earlier, that caste system is also in place in African American culture with
Yeah.
class.
yeah.
And there's a book, Our Kind of People, that was written, and how these clubs were set up, the black schools and colorism and all those things that are set up to create that same dynamic, and its power and control. So you have this across the board, that this is a problem we all have to work on to move toward love.
Amen. And a shout out to Wesley. He did a great editing job. Oh my God, he edited that thing.
Oh, he's the best.
Well, thank you, Ed, for following
So-
up on that. That was so good. Thank you.
It was amazing. I saw it on TV, then preached about it, and then you said, hey, here's how you get to the guy. And I did, and it worked. And now we're getting to Arno. Yeah.
That's great.
It's absolutely.
Yeah. So do we want
Yeah,
to
Marty.
get back to Charlotte? Did I miss? I kind of faded out for a minute. Did we ever get back to what you learned when you talked to the churches in Charlotte about what they're doing differently than what we're doing in Atlanta?
That's a good story, Adelaide. Tell them.
So Panky introduced me to it's Covenant Presbyterian. And they also, as Ann described, thank you, Cappy, they also got caught up in the swarm of these studies. And I think they were mortified in the way that they felt like this is absolutely, it was a complete disconnect for them as a society and as a culture and as a city. And so there were 2 or 3 individuals that really drove that reality to pass, that really brought together the whole group. So the president of the Bank of America attended that church, as well as the president of the Foundation for the Carolinas. So the 2 or 3 or 4 of these folks really got together and personally said, we're going to create a response to this, and basically went to each of the partners that had a stake in this solution and said, we're going to do this. What do you want to do? What part do you want to play? Otherwise, we're going to create a part for you to play. They created a task force with 18 people on it that lasted for 18 months, that interviewed Raj Chetty. They went and interviewed communities in Charlotte and really dug into the data and dug into the institutions in Charlotte and came up with basically a 3-point plan. And then ultimately ended up creating an organization, a nonprofit out of it, to specifically monitor progress towards the plan that was devised from the study. And Raj Chetty is still connected to them. And Covenant Presbyterian, to sort of cut to the chase, ended up, they did not have land, but they ended up putting out an RFP to for developers to respond, to build, to find a site and build affordable housing. They raised $2 million as a congregation to invest in the housing. And then as part of the rehab of one section of their campus, they actually built a school on the campus that had 100 and 120 kids or so, of which 55 they called were scholarship kids. So those were like the neighborhood kids. The neighborhood feels a lot like Midtown. It feels like, you know, you go 1 block this way, you got that, you go 1 block this way, you've got that. But it was something that the congregation really participated actively in, other and partnered closely with other members of the faith community on that leadership opportunity.
Adelaide, can I just
took it seriously.
interject right there? Ed, that is a congregation that is dying to make a presentation to us, because when they saw the situation around St. Luke's, they saw advantages they didn't have. we've got some huge advantage. Now, I admit this is a very visionary thing because we're not ready to do anything with our land that is so uneconomically used at present. This is a futuristic thing. But when we get discouraged about the bad numbers, which is the truth, we've got to live with reality. I just think we should entertain messages from churches like that, which is such good news. It is so heartening. It is, and they're looking at us and thinking, well, you're just like us, except you've got some advantages we don't have. The Charlotte connection is good news for us. And so I guess I'm just asking you, Ed, to help us bridge over from, in your transition, to be more welcoming to people that are so eager to share examples that are very relevant to us, but are hope inspiring rather than daunting and I don't know, soul crunching in terms of the enormity of the problems.
I'm totally on board. Yeah, I'm very attracted to, my brother-in-law was a member of that church, and I know it pretty well. It's a great, great place.
The senior pastor, the senior pastor came down and met with, it was a senior pastor and the development consultant and the person who helped arrange the equity contribution. So they were very keen to meet with us to figure out, and yeah, they didn't have the land. They had Hugh McCall, who's the president of the Bank of America, but they didn't have land. They had, the other thing they had was they had a track record in this space. So people took them seriously. And again, they had partnerships and they knew sort of how to put the partnerships together in a way that I think most of, well, many members of St. Luke's also know.
But y'all, what was so incredible is they looked at us just on paper and they just were so impressed with our potential. I mean, they felt like we were in it together. They saw in us an ally that was attractive, and I guess it keeps going back to these partnerships. You just, partnerships are life-giving.
Adelaide.
And
Yes, ma'am.
This is a national issue too. So metropolitan partners, as well as regional partners, as well as national partners. So, I mean, St. Luke's at its DNA is a partner-making machine. And I just think it's exciting what can happen. Yeah, I'm making a list of what goes in my column and what goes in the rector's column.
The question I have is whether in working on this, you have talked with anyone involved in the new school for Cristo Rey?
I have not. Has anybody else on the call?
No, but I have a really good relationship with them, but we haven't discussed anything with them.
I had lunch with one of their development people, and you know, they were in the building and spent, I mean, they were late coming to the Cristo Rey model. Atlanta was. Birmingham's had their school for years and years. For those who don't know, the Jesuits have a school for needy children. It's Cristo Rey, it's national. And the way the diocese has to get behind it is not unlike what we have to do. And so they went into a building that was going to be destroyed by the new Norfolk Southern building, knowing that they were going to have to get out of it. They convinced the guy who owned the old Oxford Industries headquarters to donate it to them. Yes, because one of their guys understood the tax implications of the 1023s he had rolled into it. And then they got a parking garage behind that they tore down and rebuilt and put apartments above it for the housing part of it. So this is, they're already doing things. We're in our backyard. And I think it would be worthwhile to talk with some of the players there.
Totally.
It's such a good point, Lee, because I think one of the things that really came out of this in terms of the conversations with Charlotte and putting this together is, particularly in Atlanta, how place-based the impact of these issues are. And the advantage that St. Luke's has is the other part of this conversation that is a potential opportunity to really dig in is that national, the universal basic income pilot that's being worked on in the Old Fourth Ward by our district city councilor. And so that seems to be, you know, they surveyed 407 families in the Old Fourth Ward. They looked at the studies that the other cities, there's several different initiatives going on in, I think, 20 or 30 other cities around a pilot for this. And what would a pilot entail, and what would the opportunity present, not only to support Ebenezer and its community, but also entitle us to the lessons learned out of that pilot, out of that exercise. And what would we learn about our own congregation? What would we learn about our own communities? What would we learn about the persistence of poverty and how to break that cycle? So I think I sort of see a couple of three next steps is finding a way to connect on the Charlotte, with the Charlotte relationship. So whether that's through FAN or whether that's through some other institution, maybe a forum discussion or just a conversation with those of us that are interested in it. I have been, you know, kind of talking about maybe meeting with Ebenezer about participating in the pilot in the Old Fourth Ward. We would want to do it if they are keen on supporting that particular effort. And I don't know what partnering would mean. I don't know, you know, but just starting to have those kinds of conversations.
I talked with John Vaughn about that, Adelaide. I'm sorry I didn't report back to you. I promised you I was going to do that, and I did. And UN, thank you. And they're all in favor of our coming in. And
and remember, we have Jay Tribby, who's really, I've talked to him, and he will do anything with us to do it.
I mean, John said that what they're doing right now is fundraising.
Yeah,
They got to fundraise
Right.
funds. So I think that's why strategy has to be developed by FAN, frankly, about what are we going to address first and second and third, because there are price tags attached to all of these things. And St. Luke's has the potential for raising tons of money. And as long as it's strategic and the order is strategic and makes sense to the parish, you know. But it can be done, no doubt about it.
Well, and the place-based nature of it, I think it feels so overwhelming, but it's sort of staying focused on Judith's question about the fear of the loss of power, you know, and the fear of change. And if you stay focused and remind ourselves that we have the power and we are also modeling how we transition that power in our own community. Maybe that's one of the biggest purposes, the drivers of the strategy.
Right.
Adelaide.
Wrong, but I think.
Adelaide.
Oh, go ahead, Horace.
In your work in Charlotte with Covenant, did you all come across any involvement from Christ Episcopal Church in Charlotte in this effort?
I'll look at the handouts that they gave me. In fact, I've scanned them, and so I can share that. They sent me a PowerPoint and that kind of thing, but it didn't come up. I don't remember that it came up directly.
Okay.
But yeah, what'd you say? It's
one of the
Christ?
largest Episcopal churches in our denomination, and quite wealthy in Charlotte proper. So
I'm just sure. Yeah. Okay.
What I was going to suggest is I think that this is the timing now is probably ripe for going into some major fundraising activity with the appropriate scheduling and focus that we're talking about, because I just get the feeling from a lot of people just individually, what are we going to do now? There's so much need, and how do we focus? Where can we put our energy? And so let's give everybody a focus. I love it.
That's great, Annabeth.
Great. Well, Adelaide, and thank you again so much for all the work you put into this presentation. It has, yay. And thanks to
Thank you,
Peggy
everybody.
for all the thought that the two of you have put into putting this whole Pandemic as Portal forum together. So I hope that you guys will join us next week and the week after. If you're able, we'll be further exploring the subject. And my email, I'm going to put in the chat if I can figure out how to do it, because I don't type very well and talk at the same time. But you can get me through Horace if you can't get me any other way. But here's my email address. If you will drop me an email and we can share any of the presentation, any of Adelaide's links that she has for you, especially if you did not register on the website, send me an email so that we make sure that we get all the handouts to you. There's not many, but I heard several people ask if they could get a copy of the PowerPoint, and I assumed that Adelaide would be fine with sharing that. So thanks so much to everyone for your time. I know it was a gorgeous evening, although the clouds kind of cooperated and made it so that it was better to be inside for this. So